It's great to be here.
Last time we talked, or when we talked briefly, setting this up, I told you, and I want to tell you again, at least documented, that I love the book, but particularly or specifically from my personal journey, what resonated quite a bit was just the affection in which you spoke about Eastern North Carolina. So you and I have already talked about, like, I live in Durham now, and much of your life, or at least the influence of your life, was from your time in Durham, which I love. But what I loved even more was, and you specifically ended on this, and that's where the government cheese title comes from, talking about and describing these flatlands, coastal plain, Eastern North Carolina towns. I'm originally from Little Washington, and people from Durham up here don't know where Roper and Belhaven and Plymouth is. And so that hit very, very close to home.
Yeah, those are just such charming towns, or at least they used to be when, in the book, what I talk about is that I was driving trucks for a company based in Durham, and one of the loads that we used to deliver was surplus food to the little towns, out there in Eastern North Carolina on the coast. And it was just such a charming, you got into a whole other world. The roads became 2 lanes. There was no bypasses, no freeways. And it was a drive that you would make in the middle of the night to arrive at these little churches that always had unpaved lots and were mostly Black churches with, and I don't know what the people's, I guess it was a lot of sharecropping going on at that time, maybe still is. And, but just the country out there is so pretty. The live oaks, the Spanish moss growing from the live oaks, the great, there's always water, like a bay or an inlet or a sound or something like that, Pamlico Sound, and shrimp boats or whatever coming and going. It's just charming as hell, even though it may be a hard scrabble life to make a living there.
Yeah.
But the towns were just so sweet and charming. It was just a great thing to be there.
Yeah, basically farming and fishing, and it's been that way for hundreds of years down there. But it's one of those things where some of those places are growing. Like my hometown now has like rooftop bars and breweries, and it's wild to see. But most of them have maintained that same culture, that same style. And when you're growing up there, all you see is what it doesn't have, right? All the things it doesn't have. And then as you grow and become a man or an adult, you realize the beauty that's just built into it. And it's that's those places, those little bays and inlets and rivers, that's my sanctuary. That's where I find my peace.
Did you appreciate it rain when you were growing up, or you couldn't wait to get out of there?
Well, the latter for sure, but I will say that I grew up on the Pamlico River, and it's huge. I mean, people from up here, it looks like a lake, right? They're used to small rivers. And so if you played on the waterway and you liked fishing and things like that, that was kind of the saving grace. Like summers were really fun there because we had this very unique natural resource. But yeah, most of us were just dying to get out. And now it's funny because my friends and I that have gotten out are like clamming to get back and find some river property somewhere.
I bet. It's like a great place to be from.
Yeah, exactly. So I know with government cheese, I don't know if I've seen you say this on social media or if it was in the book, but I know that you had, I don't know, at least a little bit of reluctance to put this story out there. Is that fair to say? Wasn't Diana the one who kind of like convinced you to? So what was the thing that ultimately, two-part question, what was the thing that ultimately pushed you over the edge to be like, all right, I'll do it? And then secondly, what was your goal with it once you committed to it?
It's a great question. Because it's a memoir, it's your real story of my real life.
Right.
My reluctance was, well, like Diana, my girlfriend, she said that she's heard all my stories. So she said, you should tell these stories. They're really interesting. People really like them. I thought, come on, everybody's got a million stories. Who wants to hear my dumb stories? So I really resisted that for quite a while, even like 6 months into writing it. I kept looking at it and thinking, is anybody going to give a damn about this kind of crazy stuff, But then after about 6 months, I started to sort of get with it and start to have some faith in it. And the real reason I wrote it was because it's really the story of a writer's journey. It took me I was 52 years old before my first novel got published, after trying to do it for 27 years. So I thought, there are a lot of people I know from writing The War of Art and the correspondence that comes in off of that. A lot of people with big dreams, or that want to be writers, want to be artists, want to take that leap from whatever job they may be in. And so I thought that my story might be inspirational to them, because it's so full of failure,
Right.
and it took so long, and I was so lost for so long, that I thought, people might read this and think, shit, if he can do this, I can do it.
Yeah.
So that was my intention.
Well, it's the bumps and bruises that we relate to, right? Like, if you're up here on this, for someone wanting to be where you're at now, and you're kind of up on this pedestal or this mountain for them, a lot of times people have this, and I say this to people that I work with too, like, these people you look up to don't have superpowers, right? They're human just like you. They had to go through these trials and tribulations. And I think exposing that, or opening that up and being vulnerable, like you said, is key to, one, inspiring them, making them feel like they can do it, but then two, also giving them somewhat of a roadmap. It might not be exactly the path they take, but can kind of guide them along the way.
Yeah, and I do think these days with social media, where everything is instant, right? And you think, if you're 21 years old, you do a viral video, and the next thing you're living in Montecito, California, and it's not true. And so I thought, for me to kind of spell out the, beat by beat, what those 27 years were, what they were constituted of, would be helpful to people.
Absolutely.
Take away the, because everybody thinks that you're sort of born on third base, and
Exactly.
It's not true.
Yeah. Or they don't see, that's the classic, like, he was an overnight success, but it's like, you didn't see the 15, 20 years he was putting in work on the road. The book, to me, well, not to me, I mean, it's structured this way, but it's really about the power of a mentor. Like, your chapters are based off of these kind of mentors and guides that you've had along the way, which I think is also really important. So let's talk a little bit about that. When one is going through this journey, they have this thing that they're trying to achieve. How important is it for them to have that guide, that mentor, to help them along the path?
It's funny, Rain, that when I started the structure of the book, it's divided into 7 sections, and each one is named after somebody that was a mentor to me. But when I started the book, that wasn't clear to me at all. It just sort of evolved. And at some point in the book, I thought, this is really about the people that have helped me. And the interesting other part about it that I only sort of appreciated in retrospect as I was writing it was that only 2 or 3 of them were writing mentors. The others were just people I knew in my life.
Right.
My boss at the trucking company in Durham, and a guy that I never even knew his last name, who we did migrant labor together, who became a mentor to me. And also, I'm sure 4 or 5 of these people didn't even know that they were mentors to me.
Of
and
course,
I didn't even know it at the time.
That's a good point.
It wasn't like they took me under their wing and taught me things. I just sort of watched them, worked for them or worked with them, and picked it up. And it was only later, thinking back on it, that I realized, I really learned a lot from Hugh Reeves or from John from Seattle, that kind of thing. And I think that really is how we do learn. I'll get a little long-winded here, Rain, on this thing.
That's all right, buddy.
There's things you learn in school, or you can learn from books, but the most important stuff is what I'm starting to call for myself kind of soft skills.
Yes.
Like, how do you start something?
Yeah.
Somebody wants to write a book or write a movie or do an enterprise like you've done, so many people can't even start. And it took, right? They just think about it. They put it off and put it off and put it off. That's a skill nobody teaches you. How do you start something? How do you finish something? That was a big thing for me, to get this close to the end and then blow it up, because I was afraid if I put myself out there, it would fail, and et cetera, et cetera. So that's another skill nobody teaches. There's no class in school that says,
Mm-hmm.
how do you finish things? Or how do you handle the middle of something? When you're, a year and a half into something, you can't see the end. You're already too far in terms of sunk costs to
Mm-hmm.
back out, and you're panicking. How do you deal with that? And the way you learn that is from mentors. It's usually from bosses or somebody that you're working with that when you drop the ball, you kind of turn to them and go, what do we do? And they
Yeah.
take over. And when they've solved the problem, then you ask them, how did you do that? What place did you go to in your head? And so I do think mentors are tremendously important, because that's where you learn those soft skills that they don't teach you in school.
Absolutely. Um, I think about mentors a lot. I've got a theory. And so I want to ask you a question. I don't do a lot of these rapid fire, like, if you only could eat one food for the rest of your life, what would it be? I don't do a lot of those questions. But
Potato chips.
when when I think about mentors, I've said this before. I think about a couple of different types of mentors. One, the one that you work for, like you've said, like a real mentorship, even if they don't understand that they are a mentor. Now I think we're in a space, especially now with social media, where you can have what I call kind of digital mentors or mentors from afar, also not knowing, people like yourself that show their story and their bumps and bruises on social media that you can glean wisdom from. I think that's kind of another type of mentor. But
Yeah.
there's another one. This is a theory that I have, that people can also have fictional mentors, fictional characters and stories that, like, they would
I've never
love
thought of that.
to be
Could
their
you
mentor.
elaborate on that?
Exactly. So for me, I grew up an athlete. Coach Eric Taylor from Friday Night Lights, the TV show, the movie is awesome. The TV show is equally awesome, even though I was a little reluctant because I loved the movie. But that's a version for me. Like, a man tries to be honest and have integrity, but also like guiding these young kids into adulthood, et cetera, et cetera. So, not to put you on the spot, but if there were a fictional mentor, someone that you would like in the fictional universe to have helped guide you through life, who might that be?
Well, let me answer it in a slightly different
All
way. I mean,
right.
I'm thinking about, there's also fictional mentors, kind of like athletes that you watch, like
Oh,
like
totally.
Michael Jordan in that series. I'm blanking on the name. That 10-part series that he
Oh yeah,
did,
The Last Dance.
The Last Dance.
So good.
Like, you watch that, and I'm sure that almost everybody that watches it kind of relates to him as a mentor. And or also that the Kobe Bryant's Muse, which was really about him. And I watched that and I just soak it up. The the level of aspiration that those guys had, and the work ethic that they had, and even the kind of egomania that they had.
Big time.
Or I agree with you. That's those are great mentors. You just
Well,
soak
Kobe
it
had
up.
the whole Mamba mentality, is what they call it, because his
Yeah,
nickname
yeah,
was the Black Mamba,
yeah.
and I mean, he, rest in peace. That was so tragic, but he is still influencing people. I see videos of him constantly on social media of him having that influence on people
Yeah.
still.
I mean, I live in Los Angeles, and there are murals all over
Yeah,
town
I can
that
imagine.
people have just put up spontaneously, of him and Jana, his daughter. And so he really had that effect on a lot of people.
Majorly.
Yeah.
Um, let's
If
shift
I would
into.
say a fictional mentor, let me just go. I
Yeah.
think Atticus Finch from
Okay.
To Kill a Mockingbird would
Yeah.
be a key one for me. Yeah.
Yeah. I like it. Um, let's talk about the resistance, the elephant in the room, the giant R, the capital R. This is something that I know a lot of my listeners struggle. I mean, hell, we all struggle with it, right? But especially, like you've already said, anyone that has this idea, this dream in their head that they can do something else, they want to do something grander or bigger. And we've also already touched on the things we say to hold ourselves back. Why are we so brutal to ourselves? Why do we talk to ourselves so negatively?
But I don't think it's well, let me sort of define resistance a little bit for
Please.
anybody that hasn't done
Yeah.
this. And like one of the analogies I use is if you can imagine a tree in the middle of a sunny meadow, and the tree is your dream, whatever it may be. As soon as that tree appears, a shadow is going to appear, the shadow of the tree in the sunny meadow. And so I don't think we're creating the resistance out of some evil in our minds or anything. It's just a law of nature that when we have a dream, like an equal and opposite effect,
Right.
like Newton's law of thermodynamics or whatever it
Yeah.
is going to come in, and that resistance is equal and opposite to the dream. And I think sometimes, to get off subject a little bit, we don't even know we have a dream, but we're experiencing the resistance. And the resistance will take the form of sometimes depression, isolation, anxiety, alienation. We just feel miserable. We're unhappy. We're lost. We're pissed off. We hate ourselves. And we don't even really, and that can lead to addictive behavior or abusive behavior or self-destructive behavior. And we don't even know we have a dream. Like, we don't even know that, like, we really want to make a movie or start a business or, move to some other place and create a life for ourselves. That would be a kind of a dream type of life. And so anyway, I got a little bit off subject, but that's
No.
what
This idea, and I think about this a lot because I have my own journey fighting against that voice in your head, in one's head, the resistance, but also I help people navigate that as well. But thinking about that as it's an inherent part of it all, it's balance, right? It's like you said, the shadow to the light, so that it exists whether we acknowledge it or not.
right. We don't have to create it. It's there all by itself.
It's there all by itself. But then, so by that logic, then the light, the dream, is also exists whether we acknowledge it or not.
Yes.
So it's really about which one we feed, we pay attention to. Is that fair to say?
Yes. I mean, I
In a
think
way.
the
Well,
let me tell you a story that was in the War of Art. Where I'm sitting right now, right behind me up the hill here, is a house that Tom Laughlin, the actor, used to live in. I don't know if people probably don't remember Billy Jack. It was before anybody's time. But Tom Laughlin, in addition to being an actor, was also a kind of a renegade, unconventional Jungian therapist. And one of his theories was people would come to him with cancers and stuff like that, and he would be like the place of last resort, where they had already tried every doctor in the world and it wasn't working, and finally they'd go to him because he had a little bit of a crackpot, reputation. But what he would do, so let's say a lady would come to him and she had some kind of cancer, and she was 71 years old. He would ask her, was there some dream that you had when you were young that you gave up on? And she might say, I always wanted to be a concert pianist. And I was a wonderful piano player, as a kid. And I gave it up when I got married and I had kids. And so what he would tell her is, start playing the piano again. If you have to rent, get a Steinway, if you have to get take it really, really seriously. In other words, he was telling her, concentrate, bring the dream back to life. Start going for the dream. And what would happen is, at least according to him, cancers would go into remission. In other words, the cancer, the disease, sort of came from the shadow, from resistance, from avoiding the dream, because that dream was something that was inside the person wanting to be born, and the person would not let it be born. So it didn't remain benign. It became malignant, and it would turn against them inside their own body. So I think that when you say it's focus on the dream is the answer to me. Take action after that dream, and all of the other bad shit will go away.
This tends to come up a lot. Is there something, do you think there's something in adolescence or youth that causes us to kind of bury those inner desires that we have as a kid? That's really interesting that he says go back to the dreams you had as a kid.
Well, I do absolutely, and I think it's actually our parents and our teachers and our mentors with all of the best intentions. You know, if you're a young boy growing up in Little Washington, right? And you say, you know, I want to play center field for the Yankees. You know, your mom and your dad and your teachers say, you know, poor Rain, the guy's deluding himself. He's setting himself up for a terrible fall. Can't we convince him to be a garage mechanic and just open his own shop down the street? So they mean well.
Mm-hmm.
They're trying to protect us from over ambitious stuff, because how many people are going to play center field for the Yankees, right?
Right.
But so that goes into our head and we internalize it, and we start to say, you know, I'm not crazy to want to play center field for the Yankees, you know? And so we ourselves do that. And also, I think when you're young, I mean, I've heard enough stories where like somebody in high school would be a budding artist, let's say, and one teacher would say to them, would say some negative thing, totally crush their dream. You know, you haven't got it, give up, forget it, right? And that one person would literally, you know, put out the flame, right? And years later, they would still remember that person, you know. I remember when Mr. So-and-so told me I didn't have any talent, you know. So I do think that's what happens when we're young. A lot of times we get told we're not going to make it and we believe it.
And we stop.
Yeah.
We stop
And
doing all of it.
then that energy goes negative, goes malignant.
So it's not that the resistance doesn't ever I want to, okay, we're going to get into how we defeat the resistance, but it seems like you don't eliminate it. It persists.
No, it never goes away. Never goes away. I
So
can tell you, after working for 50 years as a writer, it's just as tough today as it is
okay
for me
so
as it ever was.
The presumption then is that one gets better at kind of, you know, trudging through it or pushing past it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
Okay.
did you have something you wanted to specific?
No, I think you did.
The thing about resistance with a capital R is that it's kind of a phantom. It really doesn't have any real strength. We endow it with a strength by being afraid of it. But if we could just sort of dismiss it, or just in other words, just sit down and do our work. That's all it takes. As soon as we start to do that, it loses its power over us for that day. It comes back the next day. But so the answer is always, to me, in action. Like if you're a writer, this is the answer to resistance right here. Just start pounding these suckers.
It feeds off of fear.
Exactly. As we start to imagine the worst and listen to the voices in our head that tell us we're no good, that kind of takes us down a rabbit hole. And after 20 seconds of it, 30 seconds of it, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, we're down the rabbit hole. Forget it. We lost that day. But if we can just, at second number one, sit down and do our work, it goes away and we're able to do it.
But they get to a point, anyone does. As we said, we've talked about kind of how people start things, but when you had talked about the classes or the skills that should be taught of how to start, how to finish, and also how to like navigate the middle, then they get to that point, the middle, right? Which has a lot of different names, the messy middle, the dark forest. It's that point where you've started the thing, you're excited about it, but then you start to hit the obstacles that are going to push back against you. The wilderness, you know, there's a million different names for it. So let's transition to a little bit of that, because this I gave a lot of speeches in the past in 2021 about this. All the conferences, their themes were like, you know, rebounding like from the pandemic or like revision or something like that. And so I had given a speech several times basically about turning your story around and how when you're in that stage or that state, the pit, the dark forest, it's hard for people to understand. They think that's how their story ends. And if you've been through it, you understand, no, this is definitely the classic middle, right? This is the tough part. So let's talk a little bit about when people get to that stage, how do they think, you know, they're never going to get there. They think that they aren't the one, their dream won't come true, and that they're a failure.
Well, let me recommend two books right
Mhm.
away for
Great.
anybody that's one is by David Mamet. It's called Three Uses of the Knife. Have you ever heard of this book, Ron?
Mm-mm.
Rain? It's a short book, and he really gets into this kind of middle passage thing. Three Uses of the Knife by David Mamet. Um, and another one is one of mine called Do the Work
Mhm.
that also gets into this kind of middle thing. But sort of the bottom line for me is, again, like we were talking earlier, that just recognizing the fact that there is such a problem, that's the middle, the tough middle, just acknowledging the fact is a huge plus to begin with. It's sort of like, running a marathon, the point where they say where you hit the wall at 24 miles or whatever it is. Like, what happens at 24 miles supposedly is the glycogen, that's the cellular glycogen that you run on, runs out, and the body has to switch from that to burning fat. And
Mhm.
the feeling is like your whole heart is going to explode. That your legs have turned to lead, et cetera, et cetera. But if you're a marathon runner and you know that's coming, you have that awareness. Then when it hits you, you go, oh, this is that moment. This is the wall, and you don't panic and you don't freak out. You just say, okay, I know if I keep running for another 90 seconds or 120 seconds, my body's going to switch to burning fat and I'm going to be okay. So it's sort of the same thing, I think, for that middle passage. When you start out, it's great to know it's going to happen. Somewhere in the middle of the thing, you're going to be bogged down. You can't quite see the end, but you're too far from the start. You've
Right.
already kind of gone through the enthusiasm of getting going. And so the answer is just bear down, just like that marathon runner, and just keep doing the work. Just keep doing the work. It's like the darkness before the dawn, right? The sun will come up. It's just a matter of waiting it out. So that's what I tell myself anyway. I know that's going to happen. I know I'm going to crash in the middle, and I just gotta wait it out and just keep going.
I've never thought about it, about you're far enough away from the start being just as problematic as being far away from the end. But that, if we were to make that into a metaphor, it's like being in the middle of the ocean and you can't see the land you just
Yeah,
left and you can't see the land you're going. And that's scary as shit. Even
yeah,
just thinking
yeah.
about that right now. So that was a little light bulb moment right there. Cause it's clear to understand that it's cause you're far from the finish why you feel like you're in that middle space where you're stagnant, you can't move forward. But I didn't realize that it's also because you're far enough away from the start, which is like the way to flip the script and look at the positive sides. Like you just got to keep going.
What's exciting about the start is that you get some momentum going, right? And you
Correct.
feel, oh, this is exciting. I have a new business. I'm getting my business cards. I've got my
Yeah.
LLC. I've got my first customers. Money is coming in. But then once the novelty wears off and you get into the middle passage, then all the momentum fades away, and you go, oh my God, what have I done?
Right.
I
So what's the antidote? Just to keep
Just to
grinding, or
keep
is there?
slogging. Like, think about, in the Bible, Exodus, when the children of Israel left, they left Pharaoh, left Egypt, left slavery, and they're heading out into the desert following Moses. There was a moment came where they said, oh my God, what have we done? And they all wanted to go back to slavery, where at least they had 3 square meals a day.
Right.
And that was like a major crisis, right? Before they finally, why are we going to keep going into the desert to this promised land that may or may not exist? We're starving, this is terrible. And I think that's a natural beat in the hero's journey. In
Mhm.
any journey, that moment is going to come where you say to yourself, oh my God, what have I done? And you want to go back.
I'd be
And
better
again,
off if I
like
hadn't
that thing in
started.
the marathon, if you're aware that that moment's going to come from the start, then when it does come, you won't panic. You'll just recognize and you say, oh, this is the moment when I'm going to want to go back to slavery. So I better just keep going into the
Yeah.
desert.
and just stay cool in the pocket. That's a
You
good
know, this
point.
is really sort of what separates the men from the boys, moments like this,
Yeah.
is because these are the moments that have no glamour to them at all.
Mm-mm.
If we're making a movie, we're going to cut over this, right? It's drudgery, it's tedium, there's no reward, it's not, exciting or glamorous or anything. But these are the moments when somebody can sit down and just keep grinding and grinding. Like I'm sure for Kobe Bryant to learn a turnaround jumper from the corner, that was footwork. It was doing it over and over and over and over. And, I'm sure there were many times when he said to himself, what am I doing this? This is crazy. But we in the audience only get to see him when he's mastered it. And
Right.
we just look at him and go, wow, Mamba mentality. But the Mamba mentality was the ability to go through that grind.
Mm-hmm.
That was the difference. That is the Mamba mentality.
Definitely. Definitely. I want to read a quote. This is a paraphrase quote from you. I think it was on another show that you were on, but it's about the wilderness, and I'll have you just elaborate a little bit more on it. You said we are blind. We're talking about the wilderness. We are blind to it when we're in it. We think our lives are meaningless. We think we are a loss. We think we are lost, rather. But every passage through the wilderness is a journey home, and home is finding our authentic self. Now, I've been through this when I made the film that kind of defined what I do now for a living. And I talk about that a lot. My listeners are aware of that, of finding your authentic self. Talk to me a little bit more about what that means and that journey home.
Well, a wilderness passage like Government Cheese, my book that we're talking
Yeah,
about, is really all about a wilderness passage. Like everybody has, at some point, you leave the safety of whatever it is, childhood or home or a safe job or whatever. And sometimes you don't do it intentionally. Sometimes you get kicked out, you get fired, you get whatever it is, and you find yourself in a quote unquote wilderness, where the familiar world is gone and you're in a new world, like when you make in the movie, right?
right.
You don't have any points of reference anymore. And that journey, which is the hero's journey, is a classic human phenomenon that happens to all of us. Probably the classic Western civilization myth or legend of this is Homer's Odyssey,
Sure.
the story of Odysseus, in his 10-year passage coming home from the Trojan War. But every one of these wilderness passages in our life, just like Odysseus, is about returning home. Like
Right.
the last beat of the Odyssey is him returning to Ithaca, where he's the king, where he's from. And so it's encouraging I think, when we're on one of those wilderness passages, and a lot of times you don't even know you're on it. All you know is you're lost,
Right.
and you're thrashing around and everything. But eventually it ends with a kind of a return home, which is where you finally sort of get through that middle passage we're talking about, and finally you realize what your calling is, or who you really are, what you really love, instead of what people have brainwashed you to think you ought to love or ought to do. And then your feet are finally on solid ground, and you can say, okay, this is what I want to do, this is who I am, I don't care what anybody thinks, this is what I'm going to do going forward. And that's a return home. And if we're on one of those passages and we're panicking or we're just really down on ourselves, it helps to remember that practically every human being that ever lived has to go through one or many of these. And it always does come out if you don't, become an utter casualty, you do return home in the end, and you do get your feet on the ground.
Yeah, I had that moment for sure. I mean, what I do now, Steve, is the process that I had of kind of taking a camera and going around the world and telling this story. I'm not that technically gifted as like a cinematographer or even an editor. And I have felt a lot of that resistance when I was around a bunch of other people with cameras and and I hit a bottom that I was there for a few years, and we eventually came out. We sold the movie. It was an indie documentary success. I didn't make a ton of money, but I put it out and I broke even, and it was positive. But what I learned along the way was storytelling first, connecting with your audience through your message, and the production value you don't need to neglect it, but I have a lot of people that chase the bells and whistles and the gadgets and gadgets without getting the message right. And nothing exists that way. Right. And so who I help now with all those lessons learned the hard way are beginners or content creators, nonprofit directors, solopreneurs, people chasing their passion now, personal brands, not Budweiser or Apple making commercials, but small to medium businesses who feel like, I can't be a content creator. Yes, you can if you focus on storytelling. So here we are, the Storytelling Lab. So that didn't all happen until I went through that whole journey and got beat up and banged up and bruised, and then came out of it home, realizing who I was, what I had to offer uniquely, and then was able to kind of establish the career after that. So one of the things that I love a lot about your perspective is usually that's all we hear, the hero's journey, the hero's journey. But talk to me about the two halves, right? Talk to me about the artist journey that follows after that, because that's what I have lived the past 5 years of going through the hero's journey and finishing that around 2017. And it informed and influenced what I built and what I am building now from that point. And I just think that's such a unique and interesting perspective about the second half of life.
Yeah, this is you're like the poster boy for this thing.
I'm in it, baby.
But it's I'll mention another book of mine. This is called The Artist's Journey.
Yes.
And the point that it makes is that I think to a certain extent, we can divide our lives in half. And the first half is what I would call the hero's journey. And what that's really about is trying to find your calling, trying to find who you are, where you belong on this planet. Like for you to get to the Storytelling Lab, to get to that point to say, okay, this is what I want to do. This is who I am. But at that point, I think, and the hero's journey is full of a lot of drama, a lot of angst, a lot of agony. It's an ordeal. Right. It's an initiation. And it can be pretty dramatic and pretty exciting. You're in all kinds of crazy places and all kinds of crazy things happen to you.
Yeah.
But at some point, once you kind of know where you are and who you are and what you want to do, then you go on to a different journey, in my opinion, which I call the artist's journey. And at that point, you say to yourself, like, for me, it was a moment when I said, okay, I'm a writer. I don't give a shit what anybody says. If I ever succeed, this is what I'm going to do. And now your life changes, and you begin to, and your question you ask yourself is, okay, what is my gift exactly? What should I be writing? Should I be doing movies? Should I be doing, what is it? And then you also have to ask yourself, how do I shape my life? How do I pay for my life? How do I organize my day? How do I organize my year? How do I make myself a professional to deliver this gift? I'm no longer going to be thrashing around trying to ask myself, what am I meant to do? Now I know. But the question is, how do I now put it together as an artist and deliver the stuff so that it's those kind of soft skills I was talking about.
Absolutely.
Where you teach yourself how to start something, how to get through the middle, how to finish, how to market something. What is this, if you're a writer, what is a story? What kind of stories do I want to tell? What medium do I want to tell them in? How am I going to get to that medium? Do I need to move to Hollywood to write if I'm going to be in movies? That kind of thing. So then you're becoming an artist. Now, I always envy somebody like Bruce Springsteen or Bob Dylan or somebody like that. Early on in their lives, they kind of knew what they wanted, right? And for Bruce Springsteen or Bob, or any of those guys, it's about making music, right?
Yep. So
now they can just focus on that. And they don't have to be asking themselves questions like, what am I doing with my life? Am I wasting, they know it. But at that point, they're on their artist journey. And the rest of their life is about producing their art, getting their gift out to the world and making it better and better and better as it goes along.
Something I've noticed about the way you approach your work, especially lately, is the output. Like when we first started talking about you being on the show was, well, put your ass where your heart wants to be. And I remember you messaged me and you were like, hey, sorry, I'm on a deadline for another book. Can we push this back to like end of year or beginning of next year? And especially so with the War of Art series of books that you have, it seems like I mean, so that was 2 this year. A Man at Arms was like maybe last year or 2021. So this output, and it reminds me of Paul Fink. Paul, was that your mentor? Rink?
Yeah, Paul
Paul
Rink.
Rink?
Yeah,
Paul
yeah.
Rink. Was it him that was just like when you turned and you're like, I finally finished? He's like, cool, start the other one today. That was him, right?
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
him. Yeah.
So my question is about like how important is that ability or that approach to just be outputting, creating, doing the work, as you say.
I noticed you have a book by Seth Godin back there behind you on your
Oh
over
yeah,
your,
yeah, I love
yeah.
Seth stuff
And Seth talks about the dip, right?
for
He wrote a
sure.
book
Yeah.
called The Dip. And to me, one of the worst things that an artist or a writer or an entrepreneur can do for their own sanity is to finish something, put it out there, and then wait for the world to respond, you know, because what's going to happen is, first of all, the world's not going to respond. They don't even know what's out there. Or, maybe if you're 1 in 100, it's a success. Otherwise, it's various degrees of failure. And so you're sitting around waiting for that to happen. Also, I think that's a very bad way mentally of being true to your gift, of being true to what the gods give you. Seth Godin has another book that I completely agree with called The Practice. And what he
Yes.
talks about in that book is that your work should be like a practice in yoga or a practice in martial arts or any kind of a practice where you never stop. It's a kind of it's a ritual that you do every day. And as soon as you finish a book or a movie or whatever it is, the next day you're on to the next one. And I think that way you never go into the dip. And for me, it has certainly worked for me. I always like to feel like if I'm 6 months from the end of a book, I want to be starting the next one,
Yeah.
at least in outline form or notes or something, so that by the time I get to the end of a book, I'm already, 30 pages into the next one. So it's a seamless transition. And in that way, I think I'm being true to the higher realm, to the goddess that's giving me these ideas. And also, if the first book fails, I'm on to the next one,
Yeah.
So I'm full of hope for
It's
the next one.
insurance.
And yeah.
It reminds me when I was a younger man, I boxed for a few years. I wasn't interested in really pursuing it professionally, but I had a few fights. And my trainer was this countryman from Chatham County, and he told me something similar. It reminds me of this. Basically, there are 2 types of people. One that when they hurt the other person, they see that they've injured them, they see that as their moment to like catch their breath, and like sit back a little bit, rest on their laurels is would be the cliche there. And the other type that smells the blood in the water and goes in for the kill at that point.
Oh, that's
And I
great.
don't know
I've never
that
heard
just
that before. That's
yeah,
great.
that just always stuck with me. And actually my first knockout came from that moment. I got my ass handed to me in the first round. In the second round, I hooked him, sit him against the ropes, and when I saw him buckle, I was like, "Now's the time if it's ever going to happen." But that still echoes in my head when I'm thinking about it. It's like, don't sit back, like you said, and wait for the world to respond. It's another great way to say it. Like, go in for it. Now that you have that momentum, we keep coming back to these same themes, right? Of sitting down and doing the work. And I think if you take Seth's approach or perspective on it being a practice, and couple it with yours about being professional, like Hugh Reeve said, like you're delivering a load. That's what you're here to do. Then you've got this recipe, and stop making art this magical thing.
Yeah.
that, you have to have a superpower, like I said earlier, to obtain, and bring it down to the science and the formula and sit down and do the damn work.
Yeah, the other thing is like my business partner, Sean Coyne, likes to talk about third-party validation, which means, how the audience or how the marketplace responds to whatever you've done, right? You finish a book and you go out there. And what he says, and I absolutely believe this, is that you need to wean yourself off that concept of third-party validation.
And it is
Forget
addictive.
it. The bottom line is, what do you think of what
Yeah.
you've just done?
Yeah.
And almost always you'll say, it could have been better. I gave it it could have been better, but let me go on to the next one.
Yeah.
And I'll try to make it better than that. It's a real vice and a real danger to let others decide how good you are, or how worthy your last work was. Only you can really decide that. It's really hard to do, because naturally we want to get good feedback and all that. But even if you don't get good feedback, if you can learn to judge it yourself and then keep going. Again, it's Seth's idea of a practice. It really doesn't matter. Today you did your yoga practice and you weren't really very good in the warrior pose. Okay, that's all right. That was today. Tomorrow we'll be back and we'll do it again a little bit better. And our life, I had a moment a few years ago where I'm a gym kind of person. I go to the gym every morning, and I sort of, I fell off the wagon. I'd been like 3 months, I didn't go to the gym. Right.
Been there,
and I was moaning and groaning to this friend of mine. It was a woman. And she said, and she was also a gym person. And she said, no. She says, that's the wrong way to look at it. This is for us, for you and me. She said, this is a lifetime commitment. So 3 months. Okay. We fell off for 3 months. All right. We'll get back. And a year from now, we'll have completely forgotten that 3 months. So I think that's the same concept of a practice that, for me as a writer, this is my lifetime thing. I'm never going to stop. That's why I am productive. It's its own reward, whether a book does well or not. The creating it, the whole process is its own reward. And I think the more you can think like that, the saner you'll be, and the more resilient you'll be.
I think one thing that people, and I have been here, I might still be here at times, one thing that holds people back is this idea of like, it's too late, or it's passed me by, right? Starting late. And that's why I particularly, and I've always struggled with that. I have unrealistic expectations sometimes on myself. We can get into the psychology of my upbringing later, but that's one of the things that's so inspiring to me about you sharing this in Government Cheese, of like how long it really took. And there was a conversation I heard, Mark Maron, the comedian and podcaster, Mark, and I think it was Louis C.K. was on his show, and both of them had put in work for decades. And it took about 25 years for them to both reach this status that they're at. And they were talking about that concept, and they were like, why wouldn't it take 25 years to do the things that we're doing, to do something at this level? Like, of course it does. Sure, we always look at the overnight successes or the people that got lucky at 20 or 25, but like, why wouldn't something this great, this big, take 25 years? And that was I remember that moment specifically and vividly, because I was like, that's such a great kind of fresh perspective on like, of course, anything worthwhile is going to take a long time to build. So the question directly is like, is it ever too late? If it happens, the thing you want, could it ever possibly happen too late?
I don't think so. And I think that the idea of, oh, it's too late, I'm too old, is a form of resistance. It's a thing that our brain is telling us, our bad brain, to stop us from doing it. Like going back to my friend Tom Laughlin, who told a 71-year-old lady, take up the piano and take it up seriously. It's not too late. Not that she will become playing at Carnegie Hall, but she can get in touch with her real self, with her authentic self that way. And that's one of the reasons I did want to write Government Cheese, since it took me, like I say, till I was 52 years old before I published a book. That will, people can be inspired by that, and say, hey, it's not too late. In fact, another story, I had a friend when I first got out to Hollywood as a screenwriter. And I remember he called me. His name was Roger Jacobs. He was another screenwriter, and he called me up one time in a state of panic that he felt like he was over the hill. I'm over the hill. It's too late. I'm over the hill. I said, Roger, how old are you? He said, 22. So, but we all think that way, you know.
Yeah.
It's not true. Maybe it's true if you want to be a professional athlete.
Right. Yeah.
You're 47 years old. But if you're doing anything else,
from a storytelling perspective, one of the things I love about your work and feel influenced by is your nonfiction and fiction work, and that's something that I aspire to have. I wrote my first book last year. It's a nonfiction book. I have a lot of stories that I want to get out. So, from a storytelling perspective, is there a difference in your approach to a fictional story and writing nonfiction?
Obviously, there is, because it's a whole different medium.
Mm-hmm.
But I really do believe that I have a saying, which is nonfiction is fiction.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by that is nonfiction goes by the same rules as fiction. And what I mean by that is, when you say nonfiction, let's say you're writing the life of Harry Truman, a biography of Harry Truman, or you're writing a story of your grandmother who came over from Ireland and, had 11 kids and became the mayor of Pocatello, Idaho, right? Something like that. Or you're writing a self-help book or something like that. The rules of storytelling, I think, still apply, in the sense that every story has to have a hero. Every story has to have a villain. Every story has to be about something, right? It has to have a theme. Every story has to have a climax. It has to build to the end. Most stories are in 3 acts, beginning, middle, and end, right? So the same sort of principles apply, I think, to nonfiction as they do to fiction. It's, of course, not many people know the principles of fiction to begin with, but if they did, they would see how they apply.
There's another Stephen out there who happens to write a little bit, who has a similar line that says, fiction is a lie and good fiction is the truth inside the lie. Does that sound similar?
I like that.
Stephen King wrote that in On Writing. And so when you had said that, I was hoping you would say your line. I was like, oh, that's very similar. All right. We're in a different world now. And like I said, I wrote my first book last year, self-published. I know my audience. I knew I'd have to do most of the marketing, so I was comfortable with that. And I'm reminded of when the story, you brought the book, I think it was your 3rd novel, to Marty, and there was like basically somebody who wanted the next
agent in the book.
Your agent,
right,
sorry, yeah. Who somebody was looking for the next big writer, and you missed the, Marty or you or whomever missed the boat, and it was like done. So it was a lost cause, right? Gatekeepers is where I'm getting. So that's such a tragic story for me to hear that. And it was like, okay, so what? It just never went anywhere because that one person didn't select you. I feel like we're in a space now where we can this whole conversation has been about this theme, where we can take charge now and bring it to our people. Are we still, like, how has the world changed now for writers, for any artists that are trying to create something, compared to when it used to be you had to be picked by that sometimes one singular person to get your art out there to the audience?
Yeah, you're right. Completely, Rain. It's a whole other world. It's a long tail world, as they say, where the bookshelf on Amazon is infinite, right? There are, 1 million new books a year being brought out, self-published, this and that and the other.
Right.
In the old days, there were the gatekeepers. There only were 5 big publishers, and they only had a certain number of editors. And if you didn't get through them, you were going nowhere. It was a good in the sense that if you did get through, you were going to, get some exposure and people were going to know you were there. But it's a whole other world now where we have to be our own marketing people. Like you say, with your book that was self-published, your audience, that's where you're going, and you have to market it yourself. And there are also breakout books, that start with, somebody's own followers, particularly some novels that just break out, and other things too. So it is possible to have that happen. But So now we have both worlds. We have mainstream publishing and we have regular publishing. And I'm sure it's the same in the music world, although I don't know anything about that.
Yeah, that
And
that
probably the
industry's
movie
gotten
world
flipped.
too, I
Yeah.
imagine.
Well, I think it's about adapting and adjusting. I mean, they're all different than they were decades ago. And
Yeah.
some people cling to the past and don't like the way they're changing, and other people adapt to it and realize how they can still create their art and get it to the people who love it.
Yeah.
And if you don't,
We have no choice. It is a new world and we got to live by the rules.
absolutely. So what's next? What are you working on these days? What are you looking forward to in 2023, which is a real year that we're in?
Well, you mentioned this book before, A Man at Arms, which was came out like I think a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
I'm working on a sequel to this right now.
Love it. Yeah. Really enjoyed
Novel
that one.
set
Yeah.
in the ancient world.
All right. Well, Steve, I appreciate your time, man. I'm glad we finally got it together. I'm sure you got a lot more of these coming up. I've been seeing you putting in the work out there in social media land, on your Instagram, your TikTok.
Yeah, I'm doing my best, Rain. But thanks for having me. A couple of North
Absolutely.
Carolina boys.
Oh yeah.
We know what that's all about. No, this is
Absolutely.
great. Thank you very much for having me. We'll do it again sometime.